If you believe you have any information pertaining to this case, you are urged to contact the UK Missing Persons Unit using the link on screen and shown in the description. If you wish to remain anonymous, you may contact Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111 or online at crimestoppers-uk.org. This video features discussions of homicide and other topics some may find upsetting. Viewer discretion is advised. At around 7:30 p.m. on the 26th of March 1971, an off-duty special constable on a hunting expedition caught sight of what he thought looked like an old bag of cement protruding from the ground within a demolished kiln on an island in the River Trent off Newton Road in Winshill, Burton-upon-Trent, Staffordshire, England. Thinking this was odd, he decided to go to his workplace to put down his gun and to retrieve a spade. When he started digging, he realised the object was actually a skull. After this, he returned to his workplace to retrieve his business partner. His business partner confirmed it was a skull, and then opened the mouth to discover an intact, pink tongue. They then promptly reported the find to the Burton police. The next day, the official dig began, and the remains were unearthed within 90 minutes. Once the complete skeleton was retrieved, the authorities determined it did belong to a human. Before being buried in a shallow grave 3 to 4 feet deep, the individual had been bound with polypropylene twine at the wrists and ankles and forced into a kneeling position with their hands behind their back. Though the ankle restraints were tight, the decedent's hands had an 11-inch gap between them. It's noted the pathologist thought there may have been an erotic element to these bindings. With little flesh remaining, they'd been dead for approximately 5 to 18 months before discovery. A cause of death was unable to be ascertained at autopsy, and it's noted there was no trauma to the skull specifically, though this is strongly thought to be a homicide. Death from poisoning, beating, or shooting was ruled out. This led police to the conclusion the victim probably died from asphyxia, resulting from either suffocation, hanging, or strangulation. The pathologist was of the opinion that death occurred during a, quote, sexual game, though as far as I can tell, he reached this conclusion based almost solely on the fact that the victim was tied up. In the early 1970s, there were only 2 routes leading to the area where the decedent was found. One was across a gated bridge that was padlocked on both entrances. The other was over Burton Bridge, and then across a rough footpath, and then through the surrounding field, and then over a fence and up the hill leading to the abandoned kilns. Police believe the latter was the route most probably used by the killer. It's also said the killer was likely a local, as it's unlikely someone from outside the area would know how to navigate through it. The deposition of the body almost certainly occurred at night, as the island and its surroundings were in view from the windows of several nearby houses, yet no residents ever reported seeing anything suspicious. The victim was a male of white European descent, estimated to be between anywhere from 23 to 39 years old. He was about 5 feet 7 inches or 5 feet 8 inches tall and had a very slight build. What hair remained was straight, medium brown or brownish red, and no more than 3 inches in length. Though the deceased only had 18 remaining teeth, 10 of them had fillings. A partial upper denture was present. This dental work, which was described as being of extremely poor quality, had to have been performed less than 6 months before death. His hands and feet were described as small. His fingernails were short and well kept. He suffered from torticollis, which would have caused his head to noticeably lean to the right. Torticollis usually occurs when the muscles of the neck become too weak to support the head. It can either be chronic or temporary, and there's no way of telling just how long the decedent may have been affected by this condition. He also had a significant underbite. The victim was found nude save for a pair of nylon socks on his feet and a wedding band on his right ring finger. The socks are described as pinkish beige with a mustard-coloured heel and toe, and were found to have been purchased from a local stall at Burton Market. They showed evidence of about 2 to 3 months of wear. Some chafing was found on the heel and toe of the socks, suggesting the decedent wore ill-fitting shoes. The wedding band was a size 0.5 woman's 9-carat gold ring, manufactured in either Birmingham or West Bromwich by Henry Shaw Limited between July 1967 and July 1968. It was one of a batch of 5,000 and wasn't sold to retailers until 1969. It should be noted that men wearing their wedding ring on their right hand as opposed to their left is uncommon in the UK. This suggests the decedent may have been from outside the union. Wearing the wedding ring on the right hand is more typical of Eastern European cultures, as well as a small number of Central and Western European cultures. This, along with the fact that despite the extensive publication of the victim's dental work throughout England and Wales, no dentist has ever claimed it as their own, leads many to believe that the victim may have been foreign to the UK. The material binding the victim at the wrists and ankles was discovered to have originated from Bradford, West Yorkshire. It was durable, and the type used in an industrial setting to bind things like small bundles of plastic or steel tubing. Enough flesh remained on the body for partial fingerprints to be obtained. Despite this, no matches turned up when they were circulated. By October 1971, over 400 missing people worldwide had been ruled out as potential matches. When efforts to identify the decedent were utterly exhausted and he remained a mystery, authorities nicknamed him Fred the Head, owing to the fact that his head was found before the rest of his body. For decency's sake, I'll refer to the deceased simply as Fred from here on out. In 2006, Fred was given a new facial reconstruction by Professor Caroline Wilkinson at Liverpool John Moores University's Face Lab. Professor Wilkinson was the first person to identify the torticollis evident in Fred's remains, which she reflected in her reconstruction. In June 2017, Fred's case was featured on Crime Watch Roadshow, a TV programme dedicated to profiling cold cases in the UK in the hope of attaining information from the public which may aid in solving these crimes. Shortly afterwards, a family in Wales contacted detectives, fearing Fred may have been their relative, 27-year-old John Henry Jones, who went missing from Trevor in Denbighshire in November 1970. This seemed like a promising lead, as the dental records looked remarkably similar, but when Fred's DNA was tested against Jones's brother, it was not a match. A new appeal for information was set into motion on the 50th anniversary of the discovery of Fred's remains in 2021. Also in 2021, it was announced detectives were looking into the theory that Fred may have been a victim of serial killer Anthony John Hardy, aka the Camden Ripper. Hardy, who would have been about 19 years old at the time of Fred's death, was born and raised in Linshill, the parish in which Fred's remains were located. If you recall, police do believe Fred's killer was a local. Hardy was also known to dress his victims in devil masks and colourful socks to take pictures of the men after death, and Fred was found nude but for his socks. For the 2002 murders of 38-year-old Sally White, 34-year-old Bridget McLennan, and 29-year-old Elizabeth Valad, Hardy was arrested in 2003 and sentenced to life. He died in prison at the age of 69 in late November 2020 from complications of sepsis and COVID-19. Though Fred was male, all Hardy's known victims were female. Because of this, online sleuths have put forth the possibility that Fred was biologically female, but misgendered by the pathologist. This would explain why he had such a delicate frame for a male, and why he was wearing a woman's wedding ring. However, police have dismissed this theory on the grounds that DNA taken from the remains proves they were those of a biological male. This doesn't eliminate the possibility that Fred may have presented as female. A woman named Zoe, who grew up in the Winds Hill area in the 1950s and 60s, has stated she recalls a local her father associated with, who she described as a, quote, female impersonator, who she believed performed on stage. This individual, whose name Zoe does not recall, reportedly lived just a few streets away from Anthony Hardy. Zoe and her family moved to Australia in September 1969, and her father has since passed away, so she has no information on what may have become of the individual she described. If this individual was Fred, and I want to emphasise this is just speculation and nothing more, them falling victim to Anthony Hardy does seem somewhat more likely. In and around 1969, Winds Hill's population was only about 7,000, which some have put forth as evidence of Hardy's involvement, as they believe two murderers being present among this number of people would be, in their opinion, unlikely. Though Hardy was only ever convicted of 3 murders, police believe he may have been guilty of upwards of 9. In 1982, he physically assaulted and then attempted to drown his wife, unsuccessful only because one of their children walked in on him. For this, he was arrested, but the charges were dropped and he was instead sent to a psychiatric clinic. Sometime in 1986, his wife divorced him, citing domestic abuse as the grounds. After this, Hardy began stalking her, so she filed a restraining order. Hardy eventually broke this restraining order and served a short time in prison as a result. Around this time, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and peripheral neuropathy. In the early to mid-1990s, he faced homelessness and became addicted to drugs and alcohol, again spending a short while in prison, this time for theft and aggressive behaviour. In 1998, after spending several extended periods of time in various psychiatric facilities in London, Hardy was accused of rape by an 18-year-old sex worker who has not been publicly named. Again, the charges were dropped, this time due to a lack of evidence, and he was ordered to seek yet more psychiatric counselling. It was later revealed by the Metropolitan Police that this was only one of 3 or 4 rape cases for which Hardy was investigated. In 2002, Hardy would commit his first confirmed murder, finally being brought to justice for this another year later. Hardy murdered for sexual gratification. Whilst on trial before admitting to murder, he claimed he'd accidentally killed his victims, who died as a result of asphyxia whilst in the midst of BDSM sessions. This would fit in with what the pathologist concluded about Fred's death. All in all, I don't think we can conclusively rule Hardy in or out as the killer now that he's dead and can't be questioned, but it's reassuring to know the police are looking into this prospect. In recent weeks, as of me writing this script, a few new developments have come to light, courtesy of one Ken Davies, who hosts the as-yet ongoing podcast entitled The Mysterious Case of Fred the Head. This podcast really goes into depth with this case and was one of my main sources, so I highly recommend you give it a listen. If you're interested, I'll leave a link in the pinned comment. Davies was the first person to track down and make contact with the woman named Zoe, who I mentioned earlier. On episode 8 of the podcast, Zoe offered up another piece of information about a potential candidate for Fred's identity. She recalls that around the spring or summer of 1969, a woman came to her door asking about what happened to a man named Yogi. Of course, it's impossible to know at present if this Yogi was actually Fred, but it does seem like a promising lead, which I hope is being looked into. If there are any further updates concerning this, I'll let you all know in the comment section. Of over 450 missing person rule-outs, only 2 have been made public to my knowledge. These are 27-year-old John Henry Jones, missing from Denbighshire, Wales since November 1970, and 30-year-old Brian Edge, missing from Hertfordshire, England since August 1970. If any more exclusions are made public in the future, I shall add them to the list in the description. It's been over 50 years since the person we know only as Fred died, and he's not the only anonymous party involved in this case. His killer remains nameless too. They have evaded justice for all these years, and at this point they may well have taken their secret to the grave. Yet still, police have stressed this mystery is entirely solvable, given the correct information from the correct person. Again, if you believe you have any information pertaining to this case, you are urged to contact one of the following: the UK Missing Persons Unit, using the link shown on screen and located in the description, or Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111, or online at crimestoppers-uk.org. Remember, you can always remain anonymous through Crime Stoppers. Thank you very much for giving Fred's case a moment of your day.